From the Russo-Ukrainian War to ramping up military exercises around Taiwan, with President Xi Jinping historic visit in San Francisco, to millions of Afghans forced to leave Pakistan and Iran, with massive civil strife in Spain, things are getting pretty crazy. But I want to focus down on one issue that took the world by storm, and that's the Israel-Palestine war. Joining us today to talk about all of it and so much more is Joel from History Revealed. So Joel, give us a quick, maybe a quick introduction for the people that are watching us. Who you are, what you do, how you got into geopolitics, history. Yeah, just take it away.
Well, I'm History Revealed on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. And I got into it. I started on TikTok, and I mostly started because I was just looking at what a lot of young people were consuming on TikTok about history, about the world, about military affairs. And I just thought, my God, this is such utter rubbish. I have to make something, however few views it gets, as long as there's something good out there that people can see and like have a reliable source or an informed source. I'll do it, and I did it, and it really took off.
It's interesting you say that too, because I feel like in our modern era, like the new generation, all of the history that they learn is revisionist stuff or very selective, especially with critical race theory and all this woke stuff in different Western nations. So it's nice to have a breath of fresh air with like historians that actually dive deep on certain subjects.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's unbelievable just how many people take you mentioned critical race theory. Take the subject of slavery. The amount of young Westerners who think that only Western countries practice slavery, and that the only time it took place is when white Europeans were enslaving black Africans, is unbelievable. They genuinely believe that's the only time it happened. Forget about the fact that, Africans were enslaving other Africans like hundreds of years before they ever met a European, or the fact that the same thing was going on in China, India, and of course, the Arab slave trade on the East Coast and the very brutal Barbary slave trade on the northern coast of Africa. They have no idea about these subjects because they're force-fed one very narrow and sort of particular point of view.
It's also the fact that I think a lot of people, especially for example in America, are very America-centric.
Yeah.
So they don't even know much about Europe, let alone like Asia, Africa, Latin America, etc. And so like their view of history and just like politics in general is the narrowness is incredible. But then also it kind of ties into the subject we're going to talk about, which is basically they view Israel Palestine, right? They kind of have like this very soft slash nobody in other countries have different like destructive ideas or violent history or anything. And so they kind of like sympathize with people that don't even align with them for base level things.
Yeah,
But anyways,
don't align with them in any way. I mean, the fact that so many people are sympathetic to the most radical and brutal of jihadists is genuinely unbelievable.
they think everything's like. I think it also comes into this whole cultural relativism
Yes.
that's being pushed everywhere, which is basically means is that everybody on the planet, no matter what their culture, everybody's equal, everybody's fine, everything is beautiful. Anyways, I want to jump straight into it. So October 7th,
Yes.
1,200 people in Israel died from a brutal attack by Hamas. Let's take it a little bit prior to the events. We know that 6 months before October 7th, or like a few months before, there was a lot of civil strife in the country. You had what people claim Netanyahu attempting to overthrow the judicial system. Apparently, based on what I understand, is that the judicial system in the trinity of power had too much power, so he was trying to level the playing field so that things could actually function normally. And then October 7th happens. But do you have like a pretty good understanding of those months prior to it? Because I feel like people, it's the same thing as Russia, Ukraine. They see Russia invades Ukraine, and they kind of like pop their head out of the sand and just see that as like a vacuum, an isolated incident that just all of a sudden, why is Russia attacking Ukraine? Same for October 7th. Why is suddenly like Israel being attacked?
Yeah. So what you have with the Israeli judicial reform, even though the protests have happened in the last year or so, it goes back so much further than that. The what's regarded as in Israel as the judicial revolution started in the 90s, where a particularly, I would say, power-hungry judge called Aharon Barak effectively decided in his own mind that elements of it's hard, you end up going very deep into legal theory, which I won't do, but he decided that the Supreme Court had all these powers that previously it was understood they didn't have, and it effectively made the Supreme Court of Israel the most powerful national court in the world. No other democracy has a Supreme Court as powerful as the Israeli Supreme Court. There are very few limits on what they can do regarding the legislature. And because he was very much a left-wing judge, and the Supreme Court in Israel very much recruits in its own image, even though ministers can have some say, they effectively have a veto. So it's a very much to the left court, but Israel has consistently elected right-wing governments. So it's been a constant source of friction that, if you're an Israeli right-wing politician and you go through all the process to pass legislation, you work hard, you negotiate with the other side, the Supreme Court could just say, no, we don't like it. And that's that. Nothing you can do.
So, considering that's the fact, and there's a lot of like division in the country, do you think that like that would be, for example, one contributing factor as to why it was a good idea to engage Israel at this time? Because I know I've seen reports that they said like, oh, this whole attack has been planned for 2 years. But is it more like we planned the attack 2 years prior or 1 year prior, and then as we approach the actual attack, we're going to analyze carefully what's going on inside Israel when it's weak, when there's a lot of problems internally, and then there's also the fact that October 7th was, I think, a holiday for Israel.
Yeah, that's right. It was a Jewish holiday when it happened.
So it almost seems like everything kind of just aligns. I mean, maybe I'm being conspiracy. It's like a kind of a conspiracy. It all kind of aligns like a good time to engage.
Yeah, and I'd say what's a crucial part of the protests is the way to look at it is Israel's aristocracy was the ones protesting. This was the elite of Israeli society who was doing it. Israel has one of the most famous high-tech sectors in the world. So it was the CEOs and the senior staff of high-tech companies. It was former generals who are effectively sort of aristocrats in Israel, former heads of the security services. And crucially, for portraying weakness, lots of reservists said if the Supreme Court's reform goes through, we will not serve the government, which is incredibly serious. As it's happened, the attack took place and they have served. I mean, the reform hasn't passed, but I think that certainly was a sign of weakness when you have the senior ranks of the reserves of former military people sort of turning on the government and saying we won't participate, or maybe leaving it an open question, will they participate? That is a big show of weakness, especially somewhere like the Middle East.
That makes a lot of sense, honestly. And also like one thing that I thought about is like, so obviously in the country things are not going too great. You also, I think, if I remember correctly, Netanyahu had like a bunch of like corruption, like
yeah, that's been going on many years. Yeah.
But what ended up happening with the judicial reform in the end? It just went through and everyone just forgot about it?
No, I mean, part of it went through. So I believe they got rid of what was called the reasonableness clause. So one of the powers that the Supreme Court had was that they could stop a law being passed, or if they were petitioned by someone, they could strike down an action if it was, in their very selective interpretation of it, unreasonable. And I believe they got rid of that part of it, but that's only one part of the whole reform. I mean, there's far more than just that.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about October 7th.
Yeah.
Obviously it's brutal, but what was your initial reaction? What was, if you even know, what was the atmosphere inside the country? Just what was the general environment, and what your personal thoughts were?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm in the UK, but my personal thought was, I'm not surprised, and I'm not. By the way, I did not predict they were going to attack in the way they did. I'm not saying I'm some prophet who could have seen what happened. However, the state of the Israeli army for a long time. I mean, you just have to look at their performance in previous wars. The leadership has been atrocious. And I think this is a problem in a lot of Western armies. I mean, look at the American pullout from Afghanistan, the way the senior officers just messed up one thing after another. The current leadership all over the Western world is a disgrace, and well, a disgrace is I think low in quality in many ways. And it was only a matter of time before they were given a wake up call, and they were so complacent. Israel, I mean, I don't know if you have heard, but one of the things that had been going on prior to October the 7th was many Gazans were being given permits to come and work in Israel.
Oh
And
no, I have no idea.
yeah, I mean, Gazans were being given permits to come and work in Israel. They'd work for the day or for however long and then go back into Gaza. So they'd earn an Israeli salary and go back. And we're now pretty confident that they were gathering intelligence whilst they were there. And I read reports, and this is, I think, unconfirmed, but like some of the people taking part in the attacks, the Israelis in the border towns actually recognized the people as being some of the workers who had come in to Israel to work with these permits. And it's just a case of, if you're an Israeli security officer or you're a general, it's like, did you really not see that coming? Did you really think that Hamas was not going to collect intelligence if you let thousands of Gazans into your country when a terrorist organization like Hamas is running the territory? Really?
Yeah, but I mean, aren't people in Gaza going in and out of Gaza, like into Israel? Like it's been like years now, no?
So in
Or
different ways.
you're saying there was an extra influx?
Yeah, and also they were going on a regular basis. I mean, some people, yeah, were going in and out for, it was normally for a single reason. So let's say they were going for medical treatment, they'd go get the medical treatment, then go back.
Oh,
But
okay.
they wouldn't go regularly though.
I thought they worked though.
I don't, not that I'm aware of. It's only in these sort of more recent times did they allow many more people to go and work.
Okay, got it. Let's talk about the attack. So two things. Number one, in terms of like strategy, in terms of like where they hit, in terms of like just the overall like assault. We know they hit a military base. We know they're hitting a lot of kibbutz.
Yep.
What do you think the primary objective of the attack was? Do you think it's just indiscriminate, like take down every Israeli we see? Do you think it's? I mean, I don't know. Like, what do you think?
So it's hard to say overall because, of course, the attack was part of a much wider strategy. So there would have been the goals on the day, and there would have been the goals as part of the bigger picture. In terms of the goals on the day, there's no doubt that a key component of it was to take hostages and to spread terror. I mean, you just have to have a look, and I say it's not for the faint-hearted. Have a look at some of the body cam footage of the terrorists who went in. Sort of, they're taking such delight in committing atrocities. You know, when they murder and when they commit these terrible acts, they're enjoying themselves. They're having a great time, and I think that terror is very much part of the goal. You know, the goal is like, we will make you scared. Look what we can do. Look at these horrendous things we will do to your people. You will live in fear of us. And I mean, they call them terrorists for a reason. The purpose was to terrorize Israelis and to try and make them live in fear. And you know, they targeted, like you mentioned, the military bases, but they obviously went into the kibbutzes. They went into towns, and of course, you know, the music festival, and however many hundreds of people there just slaughtered.
Yeah. So two things. Number one, the first objective of the attack was based on what I'm seeing ideologically, philosophically. It's a way to basically say, look, you see, Israel, this invincible force has finally been breached. And it's a way to basically rally almost like the Muslim world together and to showcase that like we can actually take these guys down. And then the second thing, based on what I'm seeing, was you could almost say that one of the main objectives of the attack to begin with was just Iran using its proxies, which is what it is, as a way to destabilize the region, to create chaos in that area. They don't want Saudi, Jordan, Egypt, Israel all holding hands together, creating economic ties, etc. So, like, what do you think about that? That's based on what I've read and seen.
Yeah, I mean, that's
maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a pretty accurate assessment. So you've got to remember, with the various jihadists and countries who are fighting Israel, they're battling for the sort of prestige of their own people and the wider sort of Arab Muslim world as well. So if they can show a victory of some sorts, then they gain a lot of prestige sort of in the region. So for Hamas, the propaganda value of going into Israel, taking all those pictures of them slaughtering people, like this is not just a military objective, but a propaganda objective. It makes them look like the vanguard of the fight against Israel, and that's great for their propaganda. And in terms of Iran, I mean, yeah, what you said is true about them trying to prevent normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, because if they're all friends, then they can create more of a front against Iran. And clearly, Iran wants to be the regional hegemon, wants to be the big dog of the region. And if the other countries that are Iran's rivals start getting closer together, then that's very bad news for Iran. So if they could destabilize that coming together in any way, they would do it. Although, of course, we're not 100% sure just how much knowledge Iran had of the particular attack.
Oh yeah, that's what you were saying. Well, they basically say they're trying to wipe their hands clean and say, like, it's not us. We knew nothing about it. We just I don't even know if they say they funded, but they fund, I believe, like $100 million a year to Hamas. But it's also interesting to see how, like, well, first of all, before I say that, I feel like the steam for Iran attacking Israel is dying down. Do you feel that's kind of like the case? Because we know that Iran is like engaging United States forces and Israel in Syria, in Iraq with Kataib Hezbollah, in Lebanon with Hezbollah on the northern front of Israel, and then Hamas, obviously. But based on all the press conferences that I've seen, I feel like it's kind of slowly dying down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell at this point, because what is being suggested is that either Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah didn't count on America sending 2 carriers to the region and preventing the widest spread of the war. So the statement that Iran made was, we didn't know anything about it, so we're not going to get directly involved. There's a few ways to interpret that, and no one knows for sure. That could be that genuinely they weren't told, and that's the reason that they're not going to get involved. Alternatively, they might think that Hamas is now on the losing side. And actually, if they'd done much better at fighting Israel, if they thought there was a real chance they could gain something from it, they'd be rushing in there. But it's very difficult to tell.
Okay, so I want to turn a little bit to some narratives and maybe diving into some narratives that we see a lot during this war. There's obviously 2 recurring themes also certain words that are used to describe this narrative. We have basically a narrative on the Palestinian side of an oppressed oppressor. So it's very Marxist critical theory, kind of like you kind of have that kind of like that parallel going on there. And then we have basically words like genocide. They're genociding us. Like, what do you think about that word? Because like for me as an outsider, as someone from like Canada, I'm looking at like the situation unfold. I have legions of people in my country screaming genocide, genocide, genocide. But then in my head, I have a few things that come to mind. Number one, I actually searched it up because I was tired of hearing the word and not taking it and just taking it for granted. I searched up that apparently the population grows. I think the population of Gaza grew like tremendously throughout the years, and you actually have like a 30% obesity rate.
Really?
An obesity rate of 30% doesn't sound like a genocide to me. I could be like nuts, but it doesn't sound like it to me. And for population growth, are you saying that Israel's genociding and the birth rate is making up for that loss?
Yeah,
it sounds kind of nuts. And also the last thing, why does it take Israel so long to engage in a genocide? Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, the whole thing's a total farce. I mean, you'll find that it's just such a nice buzzword to use on social media, because it's got such heavy connotations when you use the word genocide. People hear it like, oh my god, because there is nothing worse. There is absolutely nothing worse in the world than a genocide. And but then compare it to actual genocides, not fake ones, like what Pakistan did to Bengal, what became Bangladesh in 1971. That was a real genocide.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm telling you, like the Pakistani army like obliterated Bengali Hindus in in what was then East Pakistan and became Bangladesh, just slaughtered them up to 3 million. It's thought between 1.5 and 3 million. And then look
Oh
at
my God.
Rwanda, for example. If you look at Rwanda pre-genocide and then just after the genocide, there's a big population drop because 800 to 1,000 Tutsis were killed by the Hutus. And I mean, the graphicness, like the appalling level of violence that goes into these genocides, to even think to compare that to what's going on now is just ridiculous. I mean, like, Israel set up humanitarian corridors, have brief pauses in the fighting to allow humanitarian supplies in, so on and so forth. It's like, you think the Hutus were doing that for the Tutsis whilst they went into their villages with machetes. I mean,
plus, I think they actually. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're like launching leaflets.
Yeah.
And calling people. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like a regime that wants to slaughter a population.
Yeah, exactly.
And they could have used, if that was the case, they could have used methods that were far more sinister. They could be shooting indiscriminately. It doesn't seem like that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, think about the munitions that Israel has available to it, like a lot of powerful Western militaries. The artillery shells, the JDAMs with these enormous payloads. If they dropped them and targeted civilians, they could kill tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands in no time at all. Forget about a campaign extended over several weeks. Just in minutes, the amount of carnage you could cause is unbelievable. But of course, they're not doing that because, they're going after military targets. And unfortunately, Hamas, like so many other jihadis, use the civilian population as human shields.
Okay, so human shields, one thing. And then second thing that I want to talk about too is this idea that we hear often that, oh, they're cutting off the food, they're cutting off the water, they're cutting off electricity. That's one of the justifications for making the claim that there's a genocide that's currently going on. And then the second thing is the human shield thing. So maybe let's expand a little bit on those two ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty standard wartime thing. You cut off the supplies of your enemy, especially if you're providing those supplies. I mean, Israel in the early days got a lot of criticism for cutting off water supplies. However, it was cutting off the water supply that Israel was providing. So a good way of not having your water supply cut off by another country is not to go into that country, slaughter its people, take hundreds of them hostage. Generally, that will make sure your water stays on.
It's interesting too, like, and maybe you could push back on this. Like, we have a dependence, like Gaza has dependence on a foreign nation for basic supplies, even though Hamas their government. But besides the point. But have there been like any efforts throughout the years to get like some sort of independence in terms of like those basic commodities? Because to me, if I'm a regime that wants to get rid of like this opposing regime, why would I have my population depend fully on the enemy? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, Gaza has sort of natural aquifers that they could use for the population, but Hamas's focus, all the vast majority of the funds they use and their internal efforts go towards funding and maintaining a war machine, not for providing for the people of Gaza. And of course, if they were able to come to a peace treaty with Israel, sort of accept Israel's existence and so on and so forth, then you could have an open border, not just with Israel, but with Egypt. And because of course, Egypt is a joint partner in the blockade of Gaza. I think a lot of people forget that, because there is a land and maritime border with Egypt as well, which is a blockade is enforced in the same way.
Yeah, I think actually Egypt. Okay, so two things. I'm trying to tie all of it together. Egypt has the border. Oh yeah, sorry. And number 3, speaking about borders, this idea that it's an open air prison. To me, it sounds kind of bizarre. It just sounds like you have borders around. But anyways, and you could actually go in and out of the country. I mean, Palestine.
I've seen a great video of it was, I assume, some sort of like social media promotion of them showing like what a nice place Gaza was. So you saw they have hotels there. They have nice restaurants in Gaza, and sort of if you look at the houses, a lot of them are that sort of you can see in the background of the fighting. A lot of them are pretty nice. There are obviously restrictions and stuff, but it's by no means an open air prison. I mean, they have plenty of supplies. I mean, people obviously we're in a wartime situation now, so the movement of supplies is a lot harder. But the blockade really was about sort of specific materials, building materials. Often doesn't seem to have made much difference in the end. But yeah, Gaza was by no means an open air prison.
Also, can you talk a bit about the human shields thing?
Yeah,
Because I keep
so
hearing all the time, like it's fake. They care about their citizens. Zionists are launching propaganda to whatever
yeah, so
delegitimize.
first thing I'd say about it is Hamas are not alone in it. So it's a pretty standard Islamic jihadi tactic. So the Taliban did it in Afghanistan, Islamic State in Iraq, Hezbollah did it in Lebanon, and of course Hamas are doing it in Gaza. You know, you put your tunnels under sort of protected civilian buildings like schools, like mosques. I mean, in the previous war in 2014, Israel sort of captured a tunnel, which they followed the tunnel, which ended up in a mosque. And you put your military hardware in schools, in various other buildings that are protected under international law, and you turn them into military targets. And the reason they put them there is for two reasons. So they know that Israel, or whether it's America or Britain, same calculation. They know that Western armies don't like hitting civilians, and they will do what they can to avoid civilian casualties. And so often military operations are aborted because they decide the risk to civilians is too high. And so what happens is sometimes it is actually able to deter a Western army attacking, in this case Israel. Or alternatively, they do attack knowing that unfortunately there will be collateral damage, but it's a great propaganda victory if you have the bodies of women and children sort of in rubble or in sort of wounded on the way to hospital. That makes your enemy look far worse. Look at the innocent people they're harming, and much of the Western press will go along with that, and you get a great propaganda win from it.
You can see that all over social media with like every quote unquote pro-Palestinian account. I have Palestine, I think, one of them, one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Sean King. Wow, when I saw my friends that are pro-Palestinian sharing Sean King to me, I literally laughed because I actually followed 2020 BLM and like everything leading up to it.
Yeah.
This guy's the #1 race hustler grifter.
Yeah.
Turns out he's not even black.
Yeah.
And now we're supposed to take this guy seriously. It's crazy because it's almost like previous credibility, like just maybe because a lot of people are ignorant, they just don't really know about it, and all of a sudden, you know, they care about Palestine and they care about politics. But when just from like my perspective, when I see people sharing these guys, I just get mad. I'm like, bro, how am I supposed to take you guys seriously?
Yeah, I mean, I found it the same with a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff. I remember when they were sharing, Ibram Kendi.
Oh yeah,
yeah. When they were sharing his stuff, it was like, do you have any idea who this is? You're sharing this stuff and expect it to be taken seriously, really?
But and I want to get to that in a bit, like this, the alliance of the Palestinian movement with the left in the Western world. But I also, before doing that, I also want to talk more about just what's happening in Israel Palestine. Do you have any knowledge of what's going on in the West Bank? Because we mainly focus on Gaza, but there are raids and things happening in the West Bank that I think like people don't know about.
Yeah, so I have less knowledge about that, but what I do know is like a lot of people like to say Hamas isn't in the West Bank. That's not true. They're not governing the West Bank, but they do have cells there, and there are also other factions. Which, by the way, is worth noting that Hamas is not the only faction that Israel is fighting in Gaza. There are other factions like Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Oh,
and
who are these guys?
So they're another jihadi organization that receives Iranian funding, and it's useful to Iran, for example, because let's say they want to take out a military action against Israel, but they don't want Hamas to get the blame, or they want to maybe put pressure on Hamas, then they can use this other faction as a means of doing so. But in the West Bank, yeah, I'm a bit less clear on that. There are clearly the worry for Israel is that whilst they're distracted with Gaza, that there will be more terrorist activity in that area. So So there have been many arrests and many military operations. I think that's a case of sort of managing a second front and making sure it doesn't open up and become a more serious problem. But my
Yeah,
knowledge of
because
that is less.
I'm pretty sure last time I checked, like almost 2,000 arrests were made.
Hmm.
You know, it's really when it comes to guerrilla warfare, I feel like people are just it's like they don't even think in terms of military strategy at all. You know, especially with this conflict.
Hmm.
It's actually a smart strategy, for example, for let's say Hamas or what is was the other group called?
Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Palestinian Islamic Jihad, for example, to use women and children as like the front line. So,
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. In France, there's a thing called liste.
Right.
Okay, these areas basically have all the gangs, and it's the perimeter around the around this area is a bunch of kids. The kids are getting paid, by the way,
Yeah.
oftentimes, and they just station there to give intel when the police is arriving.
Hmm.
Or you could have women with like weapons underneath. It could be anything. The point I'm making is that when a conventional force goes up against a guerrilla force, the guerrilla force is using everything under the sun to basically counter it.
Oh yeah.
And they could easily like, but like the point I'm making is that I don't think people like realize the stuff. Like it makes. I made a video recently. It said it makes sense that Hamas uses civilian and mosques for their base of operation, hospitals, etc. It
Hmm.
makes sense. It doesn't make sense for a force of 30,000 guys, estimation, 35,000 guys that have less resources, less support, less intel, less everything to basically be far away from civilians and go head to head with an Israeli army. It
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. So they need to do what they can to counter. And last time I checked, you guys were also the one saying that it's the most densely populated place in the world. Of course, there's civilians around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just have to look at. There's a brilliant guy, brilliant former American Marine, John Spencer, who runs the Institute for Urban Warfare Studies. He's absolutely superb in the way he describes sort of people just don't have the knowledge of guerrilla warfare, of urban warfare, sort of the realities you face in urban warfare. Exactly what you described. You have militants who are in densely populated civilian areas. You have to go in building by building. Often you're dealing with booby-trapped buildings. You're dealing with like you mentioned, women and children who some of them may be just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's very unfortunate for them. But these people, these organizations will use them as well. They'll use them as spotters. They'll use them to transport their equipment, knowing that the Western armies are hesitant to either investigate them or to fire on them. Obviously.
Same thing with like, for example, in the West Bank right now with like
Mhm.
these 2,000 guys that are getting arrested that are not Hamas.
Yeah.
Okay, they might not be like Hamas members on paper, or you know it doesn't show any indication like the headband or anything that these guys are
Yeah.
Hamas, but they can easily dress up a certain way. Hamas could easily pay a few guys here and there to be frontline activists. Sure, they're not military guys, but like they're doing that. It's that gray zone.
Yeah.
The gray zone is where everything happens and can be used as a tool to like create a narrative.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I think Western militaries or governments have been atrocious at educating the public about the realities of guerrilla warfare and urban warfare, because sort of Israel's response has been a pretty natural response in terms of the arrests, in terms of the operations. It's what you'd expect them to do when you have a very active front in Gaza and you have the potential of a second front. Like I mentioned, you would expect them to take these sort of preemptive actions and make sure that the troublemakers who could be launching terrorist attacks against you or plotting various operations against you are behind bars or in your custody in one way or another. But of course, like you say, it helps sort of the Palestinians with a narrative that they're being persecuted, but that's only if you don't look at the full military context of what's going on.
It's you know, it's also important to note like when I followed 2020 BLM,
Mm.
the level of passion in the people that were at those rallies was the same thing that you're seeing now with the
Oh yeah.
Palestinian thing.
Mm.
From the moment 2020 was unloading and they're going crazy in the street, $2 billion in damage, firebombing everything. Mostly peaceful protests.
I
Anyways,
love that. I love that line.
I fucking love that one. Mostly peaceful intifada.
Hmm.
Okay, so from the moment that the protests were happening, I was like in my head, I had context. I was like 2020 election year.
Yeah.
Oh, all of a sudden. Plus, more importantly, it was during COVID, during a time when they kept telling us, no, 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 no. Nobody should be going out and protesting January 6th and Trump supporters because COVID's going everywhere.
And some of the
And
biggest protests were in the states that had the strictest lockdowns.
yeah, actually, it's interesting that you say that because there was a Palestinian protest during that year too.
Oh, really?
It was, I remember 2020 or 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hamas fired like 5 to 10,000 rockets into Israel. Everybody forgets about it.
Right.
2 years later, we have a second attack.
Yeah.
So Israel retaliates in 2021 to 2020. Then the ceasefire happens. Everybody calms down. 2 years later, it happens again. And that's why I tell people of today that are calling for a ceasefire for the dumbest reasons. If Israel does what you say they should be doing, these guys just regroup, reorganize, restructure. Obviously, they don't give a shit about their citizens either, and they just launch a massive barrage again in 2 years.
Yeah, I mean the people who are calling for a ceasefire, I don't. Maybe some of them realize it, maybe some of them don't. They're calling for more war. You are just kicking the can down the road, and Israel has got Hamas sort of on the back foot at the moment, and to give them, like you say, the chance to regroup and rearm, resupply would be ludicrous. The example I give is it would be the equivalent of people saying in, let's say, late June 1944, when by that point D-Day has happened, the Allies are in northern France, they're pushing the Germans back, to say, well, too much war now. If fighting gets into the German heartland, there'll be too many casualties. We need a ceasefire now. Like, ceasefire whilst Germany's on the back foot. It makes no sense to do that. And of course, it would have given Germany a chance to regroup and potentially push the Allies back into the sea. So, ludicrous idea, and it's the same thing now. Yeah, the ceasefire would be an absolute disaster.
It's interesting you bring up Germany World War II as well, because oftentimes when we talk about about the Israel-Palestine war, people make this moral equivalence argument of, well, Hamas killed 1,200 people, but Israel killed 10,000. By default, that makes Israel the bad guy because they kind of like narrowly, with that one angle, just make a conclusion, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, just no understanding of how war works, and of course the difference between intentions. So, of course, that even if you put sort of Allied bombing to one side, or at least in the on the Western Front, if you put the bombing to one side, of obviously there's debates about sort of should Britain have bombed Dresden and Hamburg in the way they did or whatever. Like, the advance into Germany took so many civilian lives, even just sort of capturing city after city, and far more Germans were killed by Britain and America than American and British civilians were killed by Germany. It made no difference whatsoever to the morality of the war, or to the sort of the balance of who's right and who's wrong. And so the fact that the death toll is higher on one side than the other, it in and of itself means absolutely nothing. Especially when, as we just discussed, one side is going out of its way to make sure the death toll for the civilian population is as high as possible.
Yeah, I mean, even with the hostage situation, they knew what they were doing, because they know that when they take hostages, like those couple hundred hostages, whatever,
yeah,
they know that not only is Israel going to hold back, although I don't know if they should, but anyways, besides the point, they know that the international community is going to shut them down. I said it from the beginning I've heard other people talk about this too. From the beginning of the war, I said that, okay, October 7th happens, an assault on Israel happens, the window of opportunity is only for so long. The moment Israel re-engages and you have civilian deaths and women and suffering and whatever, the window will begin to shut and close on Israel. And we're already seeing that now. I think Norway said ceasefire. You have France that's basically turning on Israel.
Yep.
You have Joe Biden, who's like worried about the elections in 2024, saying, hey, maybe we should take it easy. It's crazy, bro.
Yeah.
And I actually made a video about it. I literally said that I think like Hamas is betting on that.
Oh
They
yeah,
want that to happen.
absolutely they are. I mean, it's all part of their strategy. Sort of like I said, the propaganda victory of the dead civilians is to get um, sort of Western publics on their side and to put diplomatic pressure on Israel. And more often than not, I'd say it works. Most of the most of the politicians in the West will be moved by it in one way or the other. I'd say one country, interestingly, that hasn't been is Germany. I mean, Germany has been steadfastly supporting Israel, and but
Wait,
you mentioned Biden. I think there was one of the calculations that Hamas made when they attacked. I think if Trump was still in charge or a future Republican was to get in who's not Trump, the support for Israel would be a lot. Maybe there would still be a window, but the window would be a lot greater. I think under a Republican than under a Democrat.
yeah, I've heard that argument too. I think it's also riding off the wave of the fact that NATO is so focused on Russia, Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
and now we jump in, and now it forces NATO to be completely divided. That's actually what people were worried about. They were saying, "I hope a third front doesn't open up with China, Taiwan."
Yeah, that
So
would. Yeah,
it's
I
just
think that would be sort of. I think that would be either the whole West goes to war, or it would be one of those fronts is going to result in a defeat for sort of what do you call them, allied forces. So either Taiwan falls, Ukraine falls. I mean, Israel's obviously not going to fall in the same way, but it might not succeed. So that would be a total disaster.
I think Israel's biggest issue right now is from a international relations standpoint.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I
They
mean,
could, they
militarily, they've done far better than a lot of people expected.
Oh yeah,
A lot of people thought that they would end up in like killing fields in Gaza City, and that they would to be taking horrendous casualties, and Hamas would be holding territory, and it would be a humiliation. None of that's happened. They
yeah. I mean,
cut off.
actually, I think my buddy talked about it too. He said like with the traps and like it's their territory, their like
Mhm.
native environment,
Yeah. Yeah.
urban warfare. It would be a pretty tough push for the IDF.
Mhm. But yeah, but I mean, see how quickly they cut off Gaza City, and and especially above ground, the military engineers seem to have done a superb job in clearing out Hamas and keeping the IDF casualties down. Even though obviously there's still been some casualties, but not nearly as many as a lot of people thought.
Dude, I was honestly shocked because I'm following every day and I see the idea. I mean, obviously it's tragic, but that's what war is.
Hmm.
The IDF like casualty rate going up 2 a day,
Yeah.
1 a day. I'm expecting like 50 a day, like
Mhm.
100 a day, but it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
not the case at all. Like I think the casualty rate right now is like 57, 60.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like post October the 7th, they took a beating on the first day when it was a surprise attack, but after that, the response seems to have been very competent.
You know, there's also like, and this is kind of like a conspiracy,
Oh yeah.
but there's also questions. There's questions on, first of all, how do they not know about the attack? So that's number one.
Hmm.
Number two is a lot of people are asking, why did it take so long for a response to occur?
Hmm.
We might not
So
even know, but I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that?
my suspicions are the amount of people who would had to have known and not said anything or done anything is just too big. So you would are they saying that the prime minister knew? So did Netanyahu know, but no one? But he did he know, but no one else did? Well, okay, maybe. But then does that mean that he knew, but none of his generals knew? The head of the Mossad didn't know. The head of the Shin Bet didn't know, but Netanyahu knew. Like, I don't think that's very plausible. I think what's far more likely it's a human quality, really. As good as your army is, you can still fall victim to arrogance and complacency, and I think that's exactly what Israel did. There's very much groupthink, I believe, in the sort of senior ranks of the military. They told themselves Hamas wasn't going to attack. So what did they do? They reinforced each other's views. I mean, I'm speculating, but this is what appears to have happened. So they reinforced each other's views. Hamas won't attack. We're safe. We're secure. And of course, it's not what we don't know that hurts us. It's what we know for sure, but just ain't so. And they
Right.
got proved. They got proved wrong. It's they thought they were safe behind behind their very expensive and extensive fortifications on the Gaza border. And it's not the first time in Israel's history this has happened. I mean, talk about history repeating itself. In 1973, when the Yom Kippur War started, Israel had what was called the Bar Lev line, which was a long line of fortifications on the Suez Canal. It cost a huge amount of millions of dollars to build and to man. And this was supposed to be an impregnable fortification against the Egyptians. And they broke through in a few hours because there was a surprise attack launched. Israel didn't respond quickly enough, and they paid the penalty for it. And clearly, in 2023, Israel's commanders didn't learn their lessons.
Wow, that's crazy. That makes a lot of sense, though. Also, like I think about it too, and that's what I hate about this entire conflict is how we kind of view each faction as like a monolith.
Yeah.
Like Israel's one singular unit, and then Palestine's one singular unit.
Mhm.
There's no subdivisions. There's no like different groups, whatever. For example, I actually mentioned that when I was talking about Mahmoud Abbas, which apparently he had somebody in his security team or a group in his security team that were becoming angry. They were becoming angry because he wasn't doing enough in terms of violence against Israel. And they actually gave him a deadline. I don't know if it's like a fake news story, but I saw like a few posts about it. And one of his security details actually got shot.
Yes, I heard about that.
That's for sure happening.
Yeah. So was the threat from his own bodyguards?
Apparently, it was an insurgent group in his in his security security force.
Yeah.
That were like, we're just tired of this guy just sitting on the fence doing nothing while Hamas is like engaging for us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But you only have to look at Indian and Pakistani history to know that often you're under far more threat from your own bodyguards than you are from enemy terrorists. Politicians frequently being assassinated by their own bodyguards, but that's a separate matter. Yeah, I mean, the Palestinians have been famously like factional for many, many years, constantly fighting each other. I mean, look at how Gaza was taken over. I mean, it wasn't a fight involving Israel; it was a fight between Hamas and Fatah. And Hamas threw Fatah members off the roofs of buildings and then dragged their bodies around the streets to the back of motorcycles. These were Palestinians doing it to other Palestinians.
It's okay. So two things that I just thought about right now while you were explaining that. Number one red flag for me, again, as an outsider, was the fact that the Hamas, I actually took a look at the finances. The Hamas leadership are loaded.
Oh, yeah.
A shitload of cash, and they chill in Qatar, Turkey, whatever, at a distance. I think like 3 or 4 of the leaders are like almost billionaires. I think, and this is the thing with like the actual war that kind of bothers me is how nobody thinks on the Palestinian side how a lot of this might be a grift.
Absolutely.
Like Hamas literally makes cash, apparently. Well, first of all, they make cash. They're getting money from Qatar. They're getting money from Iran, $100 million a year, specifically for weapons. They have billions of dollars in assets. I think they actually have like a fund, a hedge fund with multiple different asset classes amounting to like 1 billion. And then they also get cash from taxation.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And then you have all the crypto shit.
Yes, I know. Even crypto is involved. But I mean, this is one of the most sort of underreported stories of the Arab-Israeli wars is the corruption of the Palestinian leaders. And it's not isolated to Hamas. I mean, the Fatah back in the 90s in the West Bank was just they've been described as running a kleptocracy. So the whole economy was run just as a thieving operation for their politicians. I mean, you mentioned that some of the Hamas people are billionaires or close. Yasser Arafat back in the day, a man who never had a proper job, he was estimated to be worth at least $1 billion, possibly several $1 billion. That's how much they're just creaming off the people. The corruption is just on a different scale. And yeah, it's what does it bother people? I don't know. Clearly it doesn't bother them enough not to support them. But
the reason I bring that up is because, again, like for example, BLM 2020, I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing, but like
the grift.
Money was coming in from every direction. Everybody's pouring in cash, and then it goes straight to the DNC. And a lot of the cash goes to like the leadership, and they buy like fancy houses and whatever.
Didn't they buy houses? Didn't the black co-founder of it buy multi-million-dollar houses in the whitest parts of California or something like that.
But I mean, it wasn't just her. It was also like BLM Atlanta with like a Rolls Royce or something.
Really?
Just
God.
a bunch of stuff. And
Mm.
I just feel like people don't even think about this stuff.
Yeah.
And then some of them do, and they have buyer's remorse.
Well, I
But it's
mean,
like,
you just go to the West Bank now. You tend to only see when the Western press goes in, they only tend to show the sort of like looking areas. There's plenty of nice areas of it. Lots of politicians have got very nice houses there, and they've got mansions and expensive cars. There's no shortage of luxury when there's Palestinian politicians involved. The corruption is just different scale.
also, I was thinking about it now in terms of corruption, but like, I mean, this might be a new concept, but throughout all of human history, the civilians, right? Because we all talk about civilians, and like
Yeah.
we've basically granted Palestinian civilians full scale immunity from any responsibility in terms of like Hamas and attacking and
Yeah.
everything. Throughout all of human history, the civilian population oftentimes was like they either elect the person in or they support the person that's engaging in the war.
Yeah.
And then when two factions go to war, then it was just kind of like I don't know how to say it in English. Like it was just expected for like civilians to die because
Yeah.
that's just how warfare was.
Yeah.
And now it's almost I just feel like Israel's held to such an impossible standard.
Yeah, it
Like
is.
not a single civilian should be dead.
Yeah, I
And
mean, there seems like this belief, and I've talked about this before, like on my live streams. There's this belief that Israel possesses these magic bombs that can be dropped, and the bomb goes, "You're a terrorist. I'm going to kill you. You're innocent. I'm not going to kill you." Obviously, they don't exist. But yeah, Israel's held to, like you say, completely different and impossible standards. No army in history or no army of the present could ever hope to not have any civilian casualties. It's completely impossible. And I don't believe any other army is even expected to not have any civilian casualties. It's just a mature understanding of how war works, is that as tragic as it is, it's unavoidable. But for some reason, we live in a fantasy when it comes to Israel that somehow there is something they can and should do, but they're not doing.
I've heard arguments by people that demand a ceasefire. They basically say things like, "Well, IDF soldiers signed up for it. They should be getting it like in the line of fire, getting hurt and sacrificing their lives in the war. And why doesn't Israel send special forces to be more surgical?"
That one drives me insane. Like, a very serious journalist has said this. Like, well, I can't remember his name. That guy, I think he's on the Young Turk, said, "Oh, well, why didn't they just send special forces in like America did to get rid of Bin Laden?" It's like, my God, one guy in one house compared to an entire city full of tens of thousands of terrorists with a civilian population who are either helping them or being held effectively hostage by them. Yeah, that's the same.
And again, it's also like, why would Israel, whose fiduciary duty is to take care of its own soldiers and citizens,
Exactly. Yeah.
going to purposefully sacrifice them like they're cattle?
Yeah. No commander would ever put the lives of their own soldiers beneath the enemy's population. However moral they were, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, and that's why it bothers me so much, this argument of like they signed up for it. Dude, it's just insane. Yeah, speaking about Bin Laden, did you see that trend?
Oh my God! What world do we live in? What world do we live in? Bin Laden's viral on TikTok because all these kids are simping for him.
It's crazy because for example, on Twitter, there's a guy called Jackson Hinkle. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, well aware of him.
Okay, exploding in popularity. And I know Jackson Hinkle from the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right.
He was actually okay.
Yeah.
By the way, he's young. He's 23.
Really?
He's young, yeah.
Oh, I thought he was older than that. Wow, that is young.
No. And he was basically dismantling a lot of the pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine narratives. And some of it's justified. For example, like the Ghost of Kiev.
Yep.
The #1 Canadian sniper is coming in to, he's going to destroy all the Russians. The Snake Island thing.
Yep.
And there was a lot of stuff that he was saying, which is fine. Like questioning the garbage, like stories coming out in fantasy. But then what I noticed with this guy is that he basically was starting to get censored because Russia-Ukraine is very like a very political kind of like controversial topic.
Yeah.
And he ended up just leaning in fully into Russia, So whatever the Kremlin actually said, he just said it.
Yeah.
And now he's evolved. So basically, he's gone to like other topics, other subjects, other things in the world.
Hmm.
And the way I describe him is he's a blind, rageful contrarian.
Yeah.
He's whatever NATO or the West says, I go against. So when the Communist Party in South Africa says kill white farmers, kill the
Yep.
Boer.
Julius Malema, yeah.
Jackson Hinkle, oh, I love this guy. He's pro Russia and he's anti West. Palestine, oh, I'm pro Hamas, anti West. It's crazy. You just have this blind contrarian zealotry. And we see this a lot, for example, to tie in with the Osama bin Laden thing.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
whatever the West. Yeah.
I don't know if you listen to their responses to it. Like, however much I know that TikTok is full of stupid people, and believe me, I've come across things you wouldn't believe. To hear someone say, "Oh, everything Osama said was valid," even that got to me. Even that got to me. It's like, yeah, they looked at this letter to America. They looked at the first 2 points. One talked about, oh, you occupy Palestine, blah blah blah, and then the second one wasn't it about the Kyoto Agreement? It's like you pollute the earth. That's why I hate America. It's like, are you that dumb? Is your IQ that low that you think Osama bin Laden cares about the environment?
This kind of brings us back to a wider point too. Of there's a terminology in France, and we see this a lot, like what's going on in like America, Canada, the entire Western world, of an alliance of the woke people and the Palestinian protesters.
Yeah.
Especially on, for example, LGBTQ, just completely diabolically opposed, but they come together. And the point I was going to make is that in France, there's a terminology called Islamo-gauchists.
Right.
So it's the alliance of leftists and Muslims.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, what do you think about that? That's just...
I'll tell you what I think it is, and people might disagree with me on this. I think that sort of hate is so strong that it can allow you to put certain things to one side. So it couldn't get more ludicrous than the whole, pro-gay people supporting Hamas, people who execute homosexuals in Gaza. Like, I've seen the meme. Was it queers for Palestine, chickens for KFC? Like,
Yep.
It couldn't get any more ridiculous. yeah, it's a good one, that one. Yeah, so they would
gays for Gaza.
Exactly. So they would be executed in Gaza, and Iran, they would be hanged from a crane. Their treatment of homosexuals is disgraceful. But they're so blinded by hatred of the West, or in this case, Israel, that they're willing to make calls with people who would, and the word is overused, they would literally kill them.
Yep.
But the hatred is blinding them so much that they're willing to do this. And
I'm not sure if it's just hatred. I think they're philosophically aligned with a lot of premises on the world.
Yeah.
Throughout 20 years, we've been saying that the West is like an imperialist, oppressive regime that's pushing down everybody. And when you have something like the Palestinian uprising against Israel, they see themselves in those people.
Yeah, I mean, it's the, you mentioned CRT earlier. I mean, this isn't explicitly that, but this sort of, they've only been exposed to a worldview that looks at the world through oppressed and oppressor. And there's no subtlety to it. It's just good or evil. And if you're oppressed, then you're good. And whatever you do, it means you have no moral responsibility. So I think that's why so many of them are either uninterested or make excuses for the massacre on October the 7th. It's like, well, they were forced to do it. They had no choice. They were made to rape, to murder, to cut people apart. Wasn't their fault. But then if you're if you're an oppressor, however, everything you do is cynical. So however much good you do, it could only be because you're trying to trick people. It's for the wrong reasons. It's part of your imperial aggression.
Right.
And as much as that is a childish worldview, that's being taught in many of the West's universities. In fact, I'd say probably the majority of them.
It's a scary time. And also, I mean, so there's a thing in like a lot of like left-leaning like protests called the respected diversity of tactics.
Yes, I've heard that one before. Yeah.
It's basically, no matter how violent, no matter how destructive the strategies that are used for the cause, you should just respect it, just sit back and do nothing.
The ends justify the means.
Also, even when you were talking about the attack on Israel, I just and I see this with other attacks too on American bases.
Mhm.
Like these people, like we always say like they're all innocent and nice. They cheer. They literally
Oh yeah,
celebrate the attacks, and
yeah. And
any attack, any assault.
I'll tell you, like what we saw on October the 7th. I don't think people realize this. We actually saw history happening, and what I mean by that is we saw a side of the world which we thought had pretty much gone. So what happened on October the 7th used to happen all the time. If the Mongols came along to an entire city, they would go in, they would massacre people, they would kill the men, rape was common, and they would enslave the women and they'd take them back. Or,
Yep.
various Islamic empires did the same thing. Like look at the Barbary pirates. They would steal Europeans from ships, and when they brought them back to the shore, this was a cause for celebration. You have these European slaves paraded in the streets to cheering crowds, and they would throw stuff at them. Look at the pride in enslaving the infidels, in killing them and making them subjugated to our needs. It was a point of pride. And we thought that was gone. That was part of a bygone time. But you saw the way that poor girl at the music festival, her body was taken back, and the joy in people as they paraded her corpse around, cheering, spitting on the body. They were overcome with with emotion, and it was happiness.
There was even Hassan Piker,
I do.
the streamer. By the way, it's interesting to see Hassan Piker and Ethan Klein's dynamic. Anyways,
Yes.
it's interesting to see. I'll just quickly say it. Okay, I'll say two things about that.
Yeah.
Number one, Hassan Piker literally says that who cares if kids are killed or women are killed in Israel? They're settlers. They're settlers. It's the same thing as here. They're white supremacists or they're
Yep.
future white supremacists.
Yeah.
Wow, what an evil thing to say. And that's why I don't want to take these guys' side. But number two, Ethan Klein, you could just see how like he panders to the left, and this entire conflict has basically created a neutron bomb in his brain where
I
he's
know.
like, wow, the people that I pander to, they hate me.
Yeah, I don't know whether to feel sorry for him or just sort of, look at him with disdain. It's like, did you really know? Did you really not know that that's what they thought? Really?
I was listening to a French geopolitical analyst. He said that the Israel-Palestine war on the culture war in the West is like stardust, where you have certain sentiments and certain ideas in different faction in the left and the right, let's say.
Yeah.
And the Israel-Palestine war, which many people are not very clear on which side to take at first, especially,
Yeah.
is like stardust exposing what's really going on
Okay. Yeah.
in terms of like how they think and stuff. And it's interesting to see how the rift on the right leaning side has kind of like shattered, and on the left how it kind of shattered.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that I've heard of them being more rifts on the left in past wars with Israel, but I think there has been a bit more of a rift on the right than I've seen in previous times. And
So I think the rift on the left is more from a perspective of like you have a lot of people that, especially Jewish liberals.
yes,
Holy
yeah, I think
crap.
they're this. I think well, Ethan Klein.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with them going forward, because there's been so much attention paid, particularly around Biden's re-election, that he's going to lose Muslim votes in various places. But I think it might be quiet about it now, but I think it could be more significant what happens to his Jewish supporters, and not necessarily in terms of votes, but lots of the Democrats' most influential and powerful activists and donors are Jewish. And if they see that they have a party that's now making excuses for terrorists who go around massacring Jews and enjoying themselves whilst they do it, they're going to leave.
Well, it's crazy because for the last 10 years or 20 years, 30 years, whatever, we keep hearing, oh, the neo-Nazi on the right wing, alt-right fascists, whatever. And then you see this case emerge and you're like, damn, the people that hate me the most, like they're on college campus in the streets.
Yeah. Oh, I thought they were my friends. They said all these nice things.
Shit, it's crazy. It's just
it really is. And Yeah, I mean the college
You have
campuses have been a
you have a
disgrace
lot of
for a while now.
millionaire donors pulling out their cash.
So I can understand a bit, by the way, why the right is upset about what's going on because yeah, not just millionaires, but billionaires have pulled their cash out of universities. And a lot of the people on the right are saying, okay, I'm glad you did that. However, did it really take this to make you pull your money out of the universities? You know,
Oh yeah,
all their anti-Western sort of like bile that's come out of them for well over a decade now, and there's the terrible stuff they've said about America, the terrible stuff they've said about often white people um, or what are various Western nations or something. Was that not enough for you? But only now you're seeing it. I mean, come on, have you been blind? So I can understand their frustration.
that's actually one of the biggest frustrations right now with like the whole Elon Musk scandal. He's getting literally obliterated because I think he said, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read he said something along the lines of like, "You want us to have the same level of passion towards the Israel war, but you guys have been basically supporting anti-white sentiment
Yeah,
for a long time."
yeah, absolutely.
It's
And
possible.
I mean, by the way, Elon Musk has an amazing ability to upset everyone. Um, he's been accused of both anti-Semitism and anti-anti-Semitism within the space of a few days.
Yeah.
It's quite incredible. He's really pissed off both sides. But I think
Look
what he
at
said,
look at Elon Musk with the ADL.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know what? If I was a right-wing American, I would have understandable grievances with them. Like they've behaved disgracefully. The way they went after Elon Musk, the way they've they tried
Yeah,
to do the classic CRT thing of rewriting the definition of racism so it means prejudice and power rather than just
yeah.
racial discrimination. But a lot of the grievances are justified.
I think the ADL is more of a liberal think tank, and then they
Yeah.
kind of hide themselves under the anti-Semitic shield
Well,
more
yeah,
than anything.
it was, I think, fairly successfully sort of non-partisan for a while, but like a lot of
Right.
organizations, it sort of drifted leftward over time, and it just effectively became another left-wing activist organization.
The current rift, I think the biggest rift, and I mean, you mentioned the white thing, but I think the
Mhm.
biggest rift right now in the right on the right is you have this America first kind of like sentiment. Why are we funding foreign wars? Why are
Yeah.
we funding foreign nations? And then you have other people that are like, well, we need to fund. We need to make sure that we're funding Israel, especially right now in its time of need,
Mhm.
because it's one of our greatest allies in the Middle East. That's literally what you're getting. You're getting people that are like, "I'm tired of spending cash, taxpayer dollars on other
Mhm.
countries.
Yeah.
Bring it back home now." So I think that's the biggest rift, honestly, on the right.
Yeah, and again, I can understand the frustration to a point, especially with what's going on America's southern border.
Oh yeah,
The fact that it would be so simple to stop people coming in, and the fact the administration is not doing it, or the current administration, and yeah, lots of people on the right you're seeing what's going on, and they're getting really annoyed. It's like we can't solve our own problems at home, but we're giving money abroad. I personally think they're perfectly capable of doing both. America
yeah,
is well within America's means to do both, but I can see where they're coming from.
yep. I think you actually did a video about the statues. You made a few videos on the
Oh,
statues, right?
made many videos. Yeah.
Because I think you cover a lot of stuff in the UK, especially. I
Mhm.
think the UK is probably one of the biggest. Like, I just saw the protest in London, for example,
Mhm.
just like hundreds of thousands of people in the streets.
Mhm.
I was blown away by the number. It's crazy what's going on there.
On Remembrance Day, on the 11th of
Oh yeah,
November.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it hurt my heart to see that. It really did. As much as sort of like I've talked about it and debated it, it just upset me. I sort of, not just because I sort of love history and stuff, but sort of I really have I personally feel I've got a real appreciation for what the British Armed Forces do, not just now but in the past, and I understand just how important it is to have a strong military. And
So
and knowing what they went through in the world wars and in the wars since. And I think what I always said about it was, I think if people truly understood what the soldiers went through and the sacrifices they made, they would never even dream of protesting on Remembrance Day.
yeah, it's interesting too because they specifically choose that day, of all the
Yeah.
other days, and it reminds me almost of Canada Day.
Mhm.
Like in Canada, we have a day specifically for like
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
celebrating the country, and you had a bunch of leftists. We need to remember how Canada is a genocidal, occupational, colonials, whatever against Native Americans. Cancel Canada Day.
Yeah.
Just makes me mad. And
Yeah.
you know, even from even like talking about this whole like conflict in Israel Palestine, if I were, because I actually do this, I kind of look at it from a Canadian centric point of view of
Yeah.
how does it affect Canada, and
Mhm.
clearly it does because people in the streets everywhere,
Yeah.
and then people just immediately call me a Zionist, Israeli shill, whatever, and I'm like, you guys will never convince anyone with that kind of attitude.
I think it's an intimidation tactic. You know, people like you and me who are sort of on social media and we've got a huge following. I've got a decent following. We've got thick skin and we can bear it. But a lot of people are very sensitive and, they get scared off by these things. I've seen it happen to lots of people. I think they're not trying to convince. They're trying to, it's a show of force.
Yeah, but not even that. I'm just saying how, like, let's say you want the entire world to rally around your cause, but this is the way you're leading it. Not interested. Like,
Yeah.
let's say I'm somebody who doesn't know anything about Israel Palestine, like zero, and I see a group of people that are basically guilt tripping me.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm out, bro.
Yes,
You
that's
can't.
going nowhere. We've got that in common. Guilt tripping will get you nowhere with me either.
Yeah, but and I think I actually made a poll about it. I was talking about. I mean, I'll talk about the poll for in a second, but basically, what's concerning to me is that we have citizens of the United Kingdom, Canada, that are basically openly saying we're ready to almost like engage in treason if we have the chance. You know, it's also interesting too because I feel like the people that are pro-Palestine, they're the ultimate recruitment pool for Hamas. And I'm sure a lot of them would actually like if they were given the chance, they would actually be like persuaded by it. It's crazy.
By what?
By joining groups like Hamas.
Right.
Like they're the ultimate recruitment pool.
Yeah, I mean, like the radicalizer. Obviously, the means are difficult because they're in Gaza and they wouldn't be allowed in. But like the
Yeah.
radicalization, I knew the radicalization was bad up until now, but the last few weeks have shown me just how bad it is. The amount of people I've seen openly celebrating what happened on the 7th of October, and not just sort of people who you might think have a family connection, so Arabs or Muslims, but lots of leftists in Western countries as well openly said, "Oh, what a great thing this is! This is the colonized, the indigenous people fighting back against the colonized." Like,
Yeah.
if they had the means, I'm very confident they would be committing terrible violence.
It's funny you say that because I actually checked your video on YouTube before this about the
Yeah,
Somali pirates
yeah,
and how like they were basically saying like the Somali pirates are just fighting against an imperial force.
yeah,
And to be honest, if I was them, I'd say the same thing.
yeah.
Because you get guys like what's his name? The Harris guy. They're like, "Oh,
Johnny
well,
Harris, yeah,
they're just fighting back, nothing
mhm,
interesting. They
yeah.
have no motivations." And you see that was the second point I was going to make about Egypt, why Egypt does not want an army of people coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't want the. I mean, if you look at the record of Palestinians in various Arab countries, it's not good. Look at what There was a civil war in Jordan
Oh,
in 1970, which was the king and his forces against the PLO, and the king won. I mean, PLO at one point they looked like the Palestinians might actually take over Jordan, but the king fought back, and there was much bloodshed in 1970. Black September it was called, and they expelled the PLO from Jordan, and they went to Lebanon. Now Lebanon was a Christian country at the time, and probably the most prosperous and free of the Arab countries. And what did they do? They tore Lebanon apart. I mean, not just them. There was a whole civil war in Lebanon, but they were sort of the what's the word? The trigger for it. In that they came in, hundreds of thousands of them, took over parts of the country and became a state within a state. And Lebanon was just torn apart, and to this day, it's never recovered. I mean, it's still a country in a terrible state, obviously with Hezbollah and the atrocious corruption they've got. And then Kuwait,
oh yeah.
hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from Kuwait. And why was that? It was because them and the PLO supported Saddam Hussein when he invaded. So when coalition forces took Kuwait back and the king of Kuwait was back in control, kick them out.
What do you think about the what do you think about the reaction of a lot of other Arab nations and Muslim countries towards the Israel-Palestine war? Because they're all screaming ceasefire, we condemn Israel, whatever. Nothing's really done, and that's what frustrates a lot of people, right? They want you to like physically attack Israel.
Yeah, I mean that's been not a new thing. Especially sort of like before the 6-Day War, one of the things I think that pushed the Arabs forward was the thousands, if not millions, of people cheering in their streets for the jihad against Israel to continue. And the leadership know often that it's not in their interest to get in a war with Israel or to get directly involved, but they've got populations who get themselves into this bloodlust and that they're desperate for their countries to attack in some way. And obviously are disappointed in that those expectations don't meet reality because they're not going to attack. I mean, like we mentioned Jordan before. I mean, if Jordan attacks Israel now, what do you think is going to happen to it?
Also, I feel like they have so much to lose to attack Israel.
Yeah, exactly.
Compared to Palestine, which is like just bloodlust driven.
Yeah. Not
much to lose. I mean, they don't have that much either.
That's true, although to be honest, even when they did have a bit more, sort of like back in the 90s, they still went for it. I think the desire to destroy Israel and the desire for victory is so strong that even if they've got something to lose, they're willing to sacrifice it.
That's insane. Anyways, you wanna wrap it up? You wanna give maybe like your social medias and let people know? We're gonna drop it all in the comment section below.
Thank you. So I'm History Revealed on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. I believe it's History_Revealed on TikTok. Can't remember what it is on Instagram. I've had to put so many dots in there. And it's History_Revealed is the username on YouTube as well.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Joel. It's been honestly fantastic with you. Maybe we'll do another thing in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Mike. It's been great.
All right, brother.